Well, folks, a night like this traditionally we are very pleased to bring you a guest speaker, and we are doing exactly that here this evening. And this particular gentleman, I've known for quite a number of years now as well, and he's certainly no stranger to the aviation space. This is Dave Greenberg, or as we know, Rescue Dave. Dave Greenberg's favourite places in the world are standing outside of, hanging below, or jumping from moving helicopters. And Dave spent 25 years of his life as a rescue crewman on the Westpac rescue helicopter here in Wellington. Since finishing his flying, he's been running his own business using lessons learned from the helicopter and applying them to other organisations. It gives me great pleasure to welcome him here to our organisational night this evening. Please do put your hands together and give a very warm round of applause for Rescue Dave Greenberg.
G'day. Good evening. So I am Dave. I love coming in here tonight and seeing so many familiar faces after 6 years out of the industry. And one of the challenges, when Greg called me last night and asked me, could I come and do this tonight? So I'm the fill-in speaker, I'll put that out there now. I think someone got COVID, so I want to thank them. But the thing is, usually when I do an after-dinner speech, I would come up and I'd tell some story about some amazing rescue I took part in, and that just isn't going to fly here. Because I was worried that if I did it, there'd be pilots in the room that either had flown me, and there is one, or have done even more amazing things than me. So I've spent all day just worrying about writing a speech. And pretty much what I'm going to do now is throw all that out and just talk to my peers. Although I know that some of the pilots, when I started on the rescue helicopter, didn't quite see me as a peer. They saw me as extra weight that stopped them from filling up the helicopter. And we've come a long way since then. And when I started in 1991, it was the fill your boots days. And they were the best days. I was so lucky to be flying back then because we would go out on a night like tonight and give it a go. And a lot of times we would go and do the rescue. And that really showed the skills of the pilots that we were with. And now I look back on those days and I'm amazed I'm alive. Because there was certainly some nights where it just didn't work, and the industry has really changed over time. And we had those crazy years in EMS where the crewmen could be on NVGs, but the pilots couldn't. And there are many missions I'd be with Mike where I could tell him exactly what was out there. And he'd ask me to pass the NVGs, and I'm like, okay. And that was just nuts. And so for a long time, it meant that we had to catch up. And then when I left, my last flight in New Zealand was in 2016, I thought we went the other way, that the pendulum had flown or gone straight across the other way, and instead of fill your boots, it was fill your paperwork. And like everything to do with safety, I think the truth belongs in the middle. And it's really encouraging to be talking to people tonight and hear that we're moving back towards the middle. We're still being a really safe industry, but we're not yet. We can't go back to what we were doing in 1991, but we need to use the technology and the training to make sure that we're doing what we could do, whatever part we play in aviation. So, since I can't talk about some amazing rescues I did, what I can talk about is the amazing lessons I've learned over 4,000 missions that I've taken into organizations and that I'm still using. So when I left Life Flight in my 2016 was the last flight, started a business, and I'm doing incident management and emergency management training, speaking, workshops, taking my lessons from the rescue helicopter, because aviation is just so good at the lessons that we could introduce to other industries. And we see that with CRM, the way that surgeons now use CRM as a way to stay safe when they're doing surgery. So many different industries take what we've done and bring it across to what they're doing. So my job had basically been going into different organizations. It's easy to teach incident management when you've got some pretty cool stories behind you. Because if I go to a group that isn't my peers, I could fascinate them with the story of a rescue and they're really excited, and then pull the lessons out of it and make them see how that would apply to them. That isn't always possible. And so really lucky that I've had that opportunity. But anyway, here I am, and I'm going into different places. And I usually would show a winch video, a dramatic video of someone being winched down onto a ship in big seas and in bad weather. And for a long time, I was the dope on the rope, the person stupid enough to be on the end of the wire. Then I was the winch operator. But the question I would ask the group is, what did it take to be that person on the end of the rope and for the team that was out there on the helicopter? And once I got past all the smart-ass answers of being stupid and all the other stuff, I really sum it up in 2 words. One is trust, and the other one is resilience. And what I've come to do is I've taken the word trust and I've made it an acronym for what we really did on the team. Because to be in aviation and to be flying in less than ideal situations, we needed to be a high-performing team. And to be a high-performing team, we needed training. And God knows we do a lot of training in aviation. And ask any owner of any company, we probably do too much training. But the first time we showed up at a boat that was in bad seas wasn't the first time we had worked together as a team, because we had trained. And when the safety stuff started to push through and told us we can't train on bad days because that's not safe, we pushed back. Because if you don't train on a less than ideal day, how can we expect it to go out on a less than ideal day and do the rescue? That just wasn't safe either. So we had all the training, the UIT and the CRM and the situational awareness. And that just really carries through. And then we had all the resources on board the helicopter. The human, the software, and the hardware. The people on board the helicopter. The day I didn't trust the helicopter would stay up in the air, well, I probably wouldn't get in the helicopter. The computers, the GPS. When I was thinking about it, I remember when we got our first GPS in the helicopter, the GPS 100, the Garmin 100, this little thing. And I was flying with a pilot who will remain nameless. He's not in the room. And he didn't trust the GPS. And we were going down to the sounds, and we came to a point, and there were two ways we could go. GPS said, go this way. And he said, no, we're going that way. And we went there and all over the place and over the hill. And we ended right in the place where the GPS told us to go. So it took a while for some people to catch up with the technology. So we had to trust our resources. One of the hard ones we all have to trust is the you, and that's yourself. I can't spell. No, but it's the you. It's the person we see in the mirror. Because the day we lose the confidence in whatever our part of the job is really the day we have to stop doing what we're doing. And the you, in my mind, expands to the organization. Because the day you don't trust the organization, you probably shouldn't be flying for that organization. The S, that's all our systems. Our SOPs, our safety management system, our checklist. Now, aviation is better at those than almost any other industry I know. And we have some prescriptive SOPs, the checklist, do this, do this, do that. And we have some descriptive ones. They kind of go out to a yacht and do the rescue within these parameters. Because we can't possibly write down every single thing that we might see in the job. And those really worked. But what we all know in this room is the day we strayed away from those systems, we went too far away from them, things went wrong. They had the potential to go wrong, and sometimes they did. And the last T in trust was the team. Now, we certainly had to trust the team in the helicopter, the pilot, the pilot crew and paramedic. But as we've been hearing tonight, the team goes so much deeper. We had to trust the engineers. We had to trust the fuel deliverers. We had to trust the backroom people who were raising the money and paying the accounts. Because if they didn't pay the right people, they were probably the engineers and we'd be in the shit. But we had to trust all of them. And then the other people we needed to trust was our governance, our board and our CEOs. Because they were the ones we were trusting to make the strategic decisions and then funding us to do the right thing. And if they weren't making the right decisions, then we were at a disadvantage out on the helicopter. So every time we were flying with this huge team of people that we depended on. So trust, the training, the resources, yourself, the systems, and the team. But then we all know, anyone in the room knows, that no mission ever goes perfect, whatever mission we're doing. And anytime we came back and said it wasn't perfect, we knew we were lying, because there's always something we could learn. So when I was operations manager, my good became, did the team come back safely? And if they did, it was a good mission. And then everything else was the learning. So sometimes we'd go and we wouldn't find the person we were looking for, or the patient we were flying would die, or we broke a piece of equipment, or we bruised our egos. But if we came back safe, it was a good mission, and everything else was lessons for the future. And one of my bugbears in life, they're not lessons that are learned, they're lessons that are identified. Because until we change procedures and we change documentation and we change the way we do things, it was just a lesson identified. And that's one of the things that always amazed me. We'd go out, someone would make a mistake, we'd acknowledge it, we thought we trained it, and then a few weeks or a few months later, someone went out and made the same mistake or very similar. Lesson identified, not a lesson learned. So anyway, these are the things that I'm bringing into other industries, and it works. And then I tell some stories, and it's all good. Life was going really well. January 2020, New Year's Day, I was in the States with my mom. I ended up in Australia in the end of 2019. I got the chance to go and do some winching with one of the New South Wales firefighting helicopters. And I was just thrilled to be back on a helicopter, sitting outside a helicopter. And I was really nervous about calling my mom, because she was really happy when I retired. I didn't retire, but that's another story. When I left the helicopter. And so I called her from a hill in Australia and said, "Great news." And she said, "What's that?" I said, "I'm back on a helicopter." And she's like, "Oh." And luckily at that point, the Australian fires weren't on the news in the States. And I arrived in the States. Air New Zealand had this great sale, $800 return to Houston. So I grabbed it. I just figured, go see the family. And I'm with her I arrived New Year's Eve. The fires hit the news on about January 2nd. And we're sitting there watching the news, and there's this big wall of fire and this little helicopter in front of it. And my mom's like, "That's what you're doing?" And I'm like, "No, no." And I'm quoting my mom, so I'm allowed to swear. She looks at me and she said, "Fuck you." And that was enough said on that subject. But anyway, come back from the States, going back and forth to Oz, doing some firefighting. Life was sweet. And then, as we all know, March 2020 came along. And I got really lucky, because someone I had done work for in government called me and offered me a chance to go to the Ministry of Health and work on the emergency management team and on the COVID response. So I grabbed the contract thinking it would be a few months until this thing blew over. Got that one wrong. But I ended up in the last 2 and a bit years working on the COVID response. Now I know in this room that there's a mix of opinions about how we've done. Some of you will think we've had the best COVID response. Some of you will think we've had the worst. And what I've learned as a public servant is I didn't care. I had no opinion. My job was to implement whatever the boss told me to do, the Director General and the PM and all of them. But if anyone wants to buy me red wine later, I'm willing to do the debate with you. There's a nice bottle here, actually. But that aside, too. So I ended up 2 years. I was really fortunate. I spent the last 2 years working really closely with Ashley Bloomfield. And love or hate the government, I think most people admire Ashley. And what I've come to really admire about him is he was a good leader. And by that, he was a good leader to the public, but he was a good leader internally. And one day I remember going to him with news about something, and he got really pissed off, and he's like, why didn't I know about this? And I knew the answer. And I said, you didn't know because when it came up, it was nothing, and this is kind of surprised us. He got surprised at a media conference. And then later on in the day, he stopped me when I was down on his floor, and he said, I just found out you weren't working yesterday. And I'm like, no, I was on a day off. He's like, well, why didn't you tell me that? And I'm like, well, I knew the answer. Why would I throw anyone else under the bus? And the thing about Ashley is he never threw anyone else under the bus. If something went wrong, he took responsibility. It's my ministry. And I wish I had bosses like that all through my life, because not every boss is like that. And a story I won't have time to tell. We had something happen with the ship, and some Ministry of Health bureaucrat kind of screwed up, supposedly, and almost let Delta into the country a month before it arrived. And one of my keynotes that I'm doing now is I show the 3 News clip of this 3 minutes of amateurism and blah, and how bad the ministry screwed up. And there's an email in there that's all blanked out from the OIA. And I was that ministry bureaucrat. And I proudly am going to walk on stage with that email. And what no one will ever realize is what went on behind the scenes. And the resilience that we found, I learned 2 bits of resilience through the Rio de la Plata. It was a ship that came into Tauranga. And one was the resilience of the ministry. We had the right policies in place. And I, within 3 hours of hearing about a potential problem, very clearly said, nothing to see here, there's nothing to worry about. This has quickly turned to nothing. Doesn't sound so good when you watch Michael Morrow reading it out on the news. So we had to go through all the reviews and all this stuff, and we go through that. And then it was about 6 weeks later when this 3 News exclusive came on air. And so I had to relearn my own resilience. Because I didn't care, I wasn't named, but I knew it was me. And I was more concerned about the extra stress I brought on Ashley and I brought on Minister Hipkins, because it just wasn't easy for any of them to front this and say, yes, we made mistakes. We forget that when we look back on things, we look at them with today's eyes and not the rules that were in place on the day when something happened. And that happens in all aspects of life. So I was feeling really bad. I offered my resignation and I got laughed at. Like, hell, if this was the biggest screw up we made this week, it would be a good week. But the real mark of the man was I was walking home the night after the 3 News story, and I was walking towards Parliament on Molesworth Street, and Ashley was walking up. I knew he was late for a meeting because I had just left a bunch of people going to meet with him. And he stopped me on the street and he asked me, how are you doing? And I'm like, yeah, I'm okay. And he stood with me for about 10 minutes just talking about it's okay. And he said, when was the last time you stood on the podium and been asked over and over again if you were a one-show pony? because there was the time when he was being accused by the media or the opposition of being a one-show pony. And I realized in that moment that COVID is this much in my life, and the Ministry of Health was everything he was looking after. And then government, whether you like him or not, they're looking after this much of it. And so my little piece of it was insignificant in the piece of what was going on in the ministry and in the country. And yet the man took the time to stop and talk to me and make sure that I was okay. And he, I consider him a mate. I don't think he thinks the same, but that's okay. We created a thing of drinking whiskey, because last year when the lockdown on August 17th was 2 days before my birthday, and I asked him maybe we could delay it because I had a party. And he said to me, I'll mention it to the PM, but I don't like your chances. And on the 19th, on my birthday, all of a sudden around 6 o'clock that night, he came up with a bottle of whiskey, and we just had birthday drinks, just the people in my group with Ashley. And those are very different memories to the ones that I have from my rescue days, but they're equally important. But what I know is I wouldn't have gotten to do the Ministry of Health stuff without all the experience I had in aviation. So being here tonight, when Greg called me and asked me, it is such a privilege to be in here with so many stalwarts of aviation. It's just an amazing community that I've always been proud to be part of, and I miss it every day. And if anyone has seats going on a helicopter, you let me know. But I do. I love the industry and I love the people in it. And it's just been a real privilege to be here tonight. And thank you to everyone in the room who's ever taught me anything. And there's a lot of you here. And on that happy note, congratulations to all the award winners we've heard and the ones coming up. And thanks very much for your time. Cheers.
Rescue, David Greenley, thank you very, very much indeed. Absolutely fantastic. Fantastic anecdotes from an incredibly full life, and still taking those lessons from aviation out there into the rest of the community as well. Phenomenal stuff. Thanks, Dave. I get another round of applause, please, for Rescue Dave. And on this note, on this moment, it's time for us to actually do something a little bit community-minded.